Heavy Pen Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the audio recording of my novel, Unkillable Joe, a very strange piece of fiction that I'm very proud of. As I've said in the foreword, we're just going to do a read-through. I'm going to leave most of the mistakes in, probably. I'm not going to put a ton of work into this, but I am going to read you my story for free, and there will be an updated playlist as we go. I will read 2 chapters at a time, as they're very short, in many cases. This book's about 20 pages, something like that. And I think I have 30 chapters, and an aftermath, so quite a lot of jumping around. Yes, I'm leaving the mistakes in, and I'm often surprised by what I've written in this book. Unkillable Joe was a book that I wrote as what is known as a pantser, meaning I didn't have really an outline or knew where I was going. I wrote to find out what would happen. So, as you can imagine, there was a lot of surprises, a lot of characters showed up that I'd never intended on, and just kind of craziness, but we're going to jump right into chapters 1 and 2, and I want you guys to kind of hang in there until chapter 4, even if this didn't jive with you. And that's because the writing in chapters, the early chapters, are actually a very important mechanic that kicks in and it all starts to make sense. So hang in there. Very weird story. Okay.
Chapter 1.
Intro to Stupidity. Our story begins and centers around a guy named Joe. Unfortunately, there's no interesting or clever way to put that. So there you go. There's Joe. Just sitting there, looking all Joe-ish. I loathe this son of a bitch immensely, but this isn't about me. Like I said, this is about Joe. The simple chump who thought he could just start drawing one day and end up with something special. The big boob who believed he could be a respectable writer, despite an obvious lack of talent. Yeah, that Joe. Historically, he was always stupid, in that he generally made stupid decisions. But his goals weren't as outlandish in those days either. Joe was actually a fairly pragmatic kid at one point, but after a few knockouts, 7 motorcycle dumps, about 20,000 beers, and 4 shitty relationships, he decided to quit his job and make comics. He was 35 years into his pointless existence and more moronic than ever. And that's why I seem so annoyed right now. This dopey dick is the fundamental focus of this entire tale, but for the life of me, I can't understand why. He's a total ass who made himself an idiotic universe, peopled by folks with stupid names, all doing stupid things. Shit for brains over here, thought he could flesh out some of the most powerful characters ever, pit them against each other for his amusement, and somehow maintain control. The dunce wasn't prepared to write something of this magnitude, and it showed. He had no way of knowing the ripples his simple story would send into the realms beyond. If anything, he thought he was behaving himself by making a comic. The jackass was actually filled with pride at the thought of his new ambition. In defense of the turd, he was attempting to stay out of trouble. A guy like Joe found mischief everywhere he went, so he needed hobbies that kept him inside. It doesn't excuse his awful writing, but like I said, there's no way he could have seen what was coming. Who would have known that by laying down the framework for such an utterly generic story, that a no-talent hack could cause so much chaos? It's strange to think of such a weak piece of writing as being culturally significant in any way, but here you go. For the purposes of education and to serve as a cautionary tale, I give you Joe, the dumbass. That's chapter 1, guys. Apparently the narrator doesn't like Joe too much, so safe to say, not a fan. So, let's jump into chapter 2 while I'm warmed up.
2.
Why are they so big? Queen Killtits was not a lady to be taken lightly, and this was well known by the wizard Garblonzo. It was later confirmed when he was struck by a magical blast from her perfectly manicured hand. Die, she screamed. It was on the remote planet Snicklefritz that a surge of purple light lifted the hulking warlock and flung his body into a nearby boulder, breaking his back. The power is mine! Slumped against the rock, his shoulders shook with laughter. A silver-worked sword materialized next to the terrible queen as she approached. Her hips swayed dangerously far in each direction. He found her movements hypnotic and giggled softly to himself. What's so funny, she asked. Entranced, he answered in a low monotone. You are, my queen. With the blade raised, she coolly replied, Wait till you hear the punchline. He pulled himself from the distracting sexual spell and spat, Wait, I no longer have it. The imposing female froze. What do you no longer have? Garblonzo smiled through his blood-stained teeth. The power you seek. He was snatched up by the chest plate like a small child. "What?" "I knew you were coming, so I sent it." His grin widened. "Away." The wizard's eyes rolled back and his head dropped. She throttled him back to reality. "Impossible!" "There's much you don't know," he hissed back. The intoxicating smell of her mentally prepared him for death. In a way, he even embraced it, until the icy blade blurred and a purple arm pattered onto the cold ground. "Wah!" "I bet that hurt." She kicked the twitching appendage aside as though she was flicking shit from her boot. "Now where is it?" she howled into his anguished face. "A place you could never take it from." "You didn't," the queen hissed. "I did." Even through the immense pain and rapid blood loss, Garblonzo was still driven by the need to annoy her. It was his way of flirting, and he represented the true nature of their relationship. He prided himself in his ability to thwart her plans, and had always been one step ahead of her. The critically injured wizard had boasted a long history of successfully driving the queen insane. He especially enjoyed the fact that he commanded the number one power, something she coveted above all else. She constantly attempted to assassinate him, but failed in each attempt. Anytime they battled, he always came out on top. The big meanie also threw it in her face whenever the opportunity arose. Garblonzo did, however, let the beautiful queen survive after each of their encounters. His infatuation had blossomed to unhealthy levels, so he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Not his perfect queen. This time was different, though. The clever warlock somehow knew his end was in the mail, and he had planned accordingly. Their respective power levels had recently shifted, leaving Kiltits the more formidable warrior than he. As her abilities rose to fabled levels, he saw the writing on the wall. Being one of the most dominant forces in the galaxy, the queen was easily bored. This led her to come up with countless methods for destroying her opponents in combat. As her skills increased, her love of murder grew more intense. She was in fact quite famous for it. Garblonzo somehow gleaned all this beforehand. Now that the queen could finally take him out, he protested the lack of defiance by sending the number one power to the only place in the universe she wouldn't be able to take it from, to her creator. The ultimate power could usually be taken by force, but no one could harm their own maker unless it was written into the story by said creator, which was unheard of. Of course, the most recent master of the power knew this all too well. Although he was a dead man, he played to win. Garblonzo always had the last laugh. He was in fact quite famous for it. He willingly submitted to his fate when a frivolous thought slid across the surface of his slimy brain. During his final moments, he reflected solely on the physique of his opponent. She was the most voluptuous woman he had ever seen. Besides being known for her lethality, it was her body that was most often spoken of. Garblonzo Beans found her enchanting from the moment they had met. As far as he was concerned, she was the very image of perfection, and even more so when enraged. Over the years, his attraction to her had only grown. This was common with most males in her experience. Many considered it a high honor to be murdered by one so beautiful. In their quiet moments, the sick and the feeble would often pray for such a death. "May the queen take you quickly, but not too quickly," was a common toast in any pub on Zarlak 621, for example. The wizard was of similar mindset. The last image his eyes relayed was of her perfectly muscled legs, his favorite part. He fixated on them while silently praising the one who had made her. A shard of light raced up the blade and then flashed down Garblonzo's face in a clean red beam as her sword split his smile with the precision of a laser. Unbelievably, he died a happy man. About 6 minutes before Kiltits engaged her nemesis, a crackling ball of sorcery was already bouncing itself through space towards the general direction of Earth. The number one power traveled too fast to be seen with the naked eye, but its movement was felt by all throughout the galaxy who were sensitive to such things. While the queen's first blast struck the wizard back on Snicklefritz, a shitty writer on Earth shifted in his shitty chair and reached for a new shitty pen. When the number one power finally met with its intended target, that same shitty writer surprised himself with a very loud burp. On Snicklefritz, roughly 1 minute after the burp, Garblonzo's skull was halved and his steamy brains oozed out onto the frozen ground with a hiss. Both triumphant and defeated, the Supreme Woman let loose a mighty roar of frustration. The warning was heard for many miles and caused local residents to cower in fear. She was rage incarnate. She was primal. Whenever Queen Kiltits was that angry, all life avoided her approach, lest they be cut down by the temptress none could withstand or deny. The sorceress was unique in many ways. Notably, she was one of the few mortal beings in the universe who was aware of her own maker. They had never met, But deep down, Killtits had always felt that she was fashioned from the mind of another. Often, she tried to picture his face, or what his voice might sound like, but it was certain he was male. The violet-eyed woman had no idea how, but she generally knew which direction her creator was at all times. It was ingrained in her as much as any other instinct. Never had she attempted to meet him, and wasn't sure if she wanted to, but was ever mindful of the link which connected them. He apparently had no interest in seeing her either, or he would have, but she was doing just fine without him and was largely unbothered by the notion. She looked down at Garblonzo's lifeless body. The still twitching arm bounced itself around like it was trying to make its own little getaway. If what he had said was true, then there was no choice left but to confront her own creator. If she was to finally possess the gem of all gems, the number one power, she'd have to take that leap. Only a few minutes earlier, she was close to obtaining it and enjoying total freedom in every way. The fresh memory sickened her. Once again, Garblonzo had the last laugh. She kicked the right half of its torso before she blasted off Snicklefritz in a huff. Encased in a blue flame, Killtits breached Earth's atmosphere as Joe made himself a snack. With a peanut butter sandwich in hand, he kicked his legs towards the living room. Assface had just skipped past the couch when his head was rudely cupped and slammed through a nearby wall. Sadly, the PB Sammy fell to the floor and was never eaten. Joe was then vigorously tossed around his apartment. Whenever he attempted to stand, he was kicked or slapped, and his body was hurled into or through something. This made it understandably difficult to focus, but as he caught flashes of his assailant, things began to feel oddly familiar. During the first lull in the thrashing, he looked up to see a face he knew better than any other. Killtits? An elegant boot buried itself into his stomach and sent him through a wall for the second time. His limp body landed neatly in the bathtub, and he saw no reason to move it right away. Joe was stupefied. The alluring sorceress he had just spent the last year designing was real, and she was kicking the shit right out of him. That was the confusing part for our hero, the conundrum of the thing. His dopey face displayed both horror and elation while she screamed into it. "Where is the power? Do you have it?" Before he could answer his living fantasy, she hoisted him up by the head. That's when he had his first good look at her. "And these tits?" He looked down. Those tits? Why are they so big?" Okay, so that's the end of chapter 2. You've heard 1 and 2 now. So what have we established? The narrator hates Joe, okay? And then we also see a battle between Queen Killtits and the evil wizard Garblonzo on the planet Snicklefritz, where she is attacking him, as they've done many, many times, but this time she would really, really win, and she's trying to obtain what's called the number one power from Garblonzo. He kind of knew that she would be able to get it, so he sent it to Earth before she got there. So that's where we're at in the story. It's really crazy. It's going to be so nuts. It's going to be out of control. This is going to be annoying to edit. But I will do moderate editing. I'm not going to take out all the mistakes. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And again, we're going to be putting this up as a free playlist for anybody that enjoys fiction. I am writing my second book now. We have issues 1 and 2 of my comic Fibber up on spinwizcomics.com for you guys to check out. You can also check out scatteredstudios.com. If you are a writer looking to make a comic, I highly recommend Scattered Studios. I'm working with them currently. Contact owner Jason Doobie and give him a shout. Find out what's going on there. And that's about it, guys. I will return with chapters 3 and 4 next week. And I hope you guys enjoy my book, Unkillable Joe. If you're really having a good time with it, you can get over on Amazon if you can't wait to finish it and pick it up. It's 99 cents or on Kindle Unlimited. And you can also pick up the paperback. Thanks a bunch, and we'll see you next time.
The Money Pen Podcast.